Hello and welcome to the show. So recently my guests on the show have been people that are inspiring the world, changing the world, doing things that most people don't do. Now, Gesant has come as a blast from the past, and I'll tell you why. He reminded me that we were actually, I think, 1 year apart in school, and that I find amazing. I now totally recall all of that, and that's flooded back. What stands out for me is that before we came onto the show, we chatted in my office for a while, and I see this very deep, intense person trying to effect change in society, and I love those kind of things, and that's the stories that I've been bringing you. Gesant, welcome to the show.
Shukran, Faizal, and shukran for having me on the show as well.
It's interesting because people, they get to know your name, they've seen you on ETV for many years, but I always say that when we see a name in the newspaper every day and we see a face on TV, and we understand that that person plays a role in the stories that we hear every day, we need to reach out to understand who that person actually is and through what lens that person sees life. And that's why I invited you to find out who is Gesant Abardar, what does he do, where did he come from, what's his thoughts in life, where does he plan to go, and that sort of thing. So that's where we want to start. Where did it all start? Because I remember it started for me with you at Saltervai. But before that, there's a nice story.
So I come from working class background. My mom was a sample machinist for the TFG group, and my dad was a truck driver, working all the time, but we never needed anything in life because they supplied it for us, you know. We all went through tertiary institutions and we all got those opportunities, so we were very fortunate in that space. Very supportive parents, ultimate providers. So life started for me in Woodstock. We had to move out, and my dad decided to buy a house in Mitchell's Plain. And then
So the move out was?
The move out was more because of need rather than the political situation of the day. But you'd assume that at the time, you know. So I was 3 years old when we moved to Mitchell's Plain. 7 years later, we were lucky to move back to Woodstock, and that's where my relationship with Saltriv and Saltervai started. So that's where we met, and we weren't really friends or close, but I was quite obnoxious as a teenage boy. I was the boy who would say terrible things and play practical.
I was the opposite.
Yeah, I think so. And I made a point last year with my 20-year high school reunion to reach out to the people that I felt I had wronged as a kid, you know?
So it was just like a truth and reconciliation committee kind of thing. But things happen when you're young. You're different. You think differently.
I do, and I do think I've grown tremendously as a person with personal setbacks, but also personal development and experiences. And as a journalist, I mean, your worldview almost has to develop, you know? You have to rub shoulders with the very poor and the very rich, or the very influential and the very downtrodden. So you have to be able to adapt in those situations and be a voice and the eyes and ears to all levels of society. Yeah.
Of course. But let's stay back there, the early childhood. You say that your parents, they come from an average background, they provided for you guys, and do you believe that that has perhaps grounded you in a certain way? Do you look back at that saying, I've come from there, I want to be continually rooted there, but change this world where I can?
I do think so. I think my parents taught us the value of hard work, right? So I look at them now, and they live with me and my wife, alhamdulillah. I'm very fortunate to have that. But also, I mean, to have that as well, and to have that influence around my own kids, and I see them with my kids now, and it's the dad that I want to be, it's the mom my wife wants to be, you know, and I think that's been important for us as a family to stay grounded, to look at what's important, and only through those eyes can you effect change and be an activist for social cohesion. Because if you lose sight of what's important, and if you lose sight of the different areas of need in society, then you need to go back to the basics. And that's why I think growing up in a modest environment and going to a school like Saltervai, where the teachers were amazing, they were the magic at the school, I think that was a good grounding for me later on in life.
What I find interesting is that there's two dynamics going on here, and the one is that normally the guys that are naughty in school, playing on the soccer field, not sure if you were bunking at all those kind of things going on, but that surely fit the profile at the time. You don't expect to meet them 20 years later and they are the editor of one of the leading newspapers in South Africa, that being the Cape Argus. How did all that happen? Because generally to get to that point there must be a very deep sense of consciousness around various aspects. So were you out there in school knowing that you were destined for bigger things, or you just going along because I'm trying to find that?
Look, you're absolutely right about all the things. I was a kid playing soccer on the field, and I was very naughty and chirping the teachers and all of that stuff. But there was a seminal moment in grade 10, which would have then been standard 8, where a teacher, Mr. Ridwan Toya, took me along to a Saturday workshop for high school pupils at the Burger. And there we learned about the process of putting a newspaper together. And that was very intriguing. And I guess what the teachers saw in me back then was this ability to tell stories. My essays were always read out in class. I was terrible at maths and science. So this was really my only skill, apart from my self-rated football skills that I thought I was hot at playing soccer. But in matric then, my English teacher had a big influence on me, Mr. Nicholas.
So I recall him very well.
Yeah. And he asked me, what are you going to do next year? And I said, look, I'm thinking about marketing. And he said to me, why didn't you try journalism? You're a storyteller. And I've never looked back since.
So they identified that in you?
They did identify.
Amidst all the clouds of the naughty guy kind of thing, or just hanging out with friends, they saw it.
I kept my grades together. Yes. I was a B student, a B plus student in matric.
So it was the balance.
And I scraped through with maths.
Okay.
There was a balance.
The only thing that you need maths for right now is the word count. And your computer does that. So, I mean...
and some dodgy extrapolations in our stories, but there's other people for that. There's accountants to do all of that. But I guess what I'm saying is it's important that from a young age we were taught that balance, and it's also about the home life. That, too much of a good thing, that old saying is always a bad thing, but moderation is great. So I played sport. When assignments had to be delivered, I did it. But there was plenty of time to play as well, and to be a smart aleck in class and that kind of thing. So from there, I went to CPUT, which was then called Pentec, and it was a very hands-on diploma course of journalism. And with that, I think the big thing there was a year-long internship, and that was another phase of my life.
Was that a defining phase for you? Was it defining what you're going to do? Did you find that this is the space that I want to be in?
Okay, so funnily enough, the guy you're looking at now, the editor of the Cape Argus, was the last guy in his class who was selected for a placement in one of these internships out of a class of about 30, right? So eventually the Star newspaper in Johannesburg, which is the Argus sister title, said they have a space for myself and one of the other rejects. So we went up and had to go and live in Joburg for a year as a 19-year-old. 2 years after matriculating, it was heavy going for me as a kind of a mommy's boy.
But you grew up very quickly there.
I had to, and there were no other distractions. I was earning an intern salary, so I couldn't really do anything else but work, and I immersed myself in the task at hand, and within days I had my first front page lead. And I think after that experience of having that front page lead, and I remember it clearly, it was Max the gorilla at the Joburg Zoo.
Oh, I know the story.
The robber robbed somebody, jumps over the gorilla enclosure and gets savaged by this gorilla, and he becomes a celebrity. And I was the guy writing that front page lead for the Star as an intern, as a 19-year-old, and they trusted me. And it gave me a real kick and a real sense of, wow, I found my purpose here. And it's something that I'm good at, telling these stories,
Yes. What I noticed about you, and just before we started the show and we had this chat in the office, I find a very rooted person, somebody that's very grounded in what you do. Generally people that have very high-flying jobs, maybe you don't want to see it that way, but it is. It's a lofty position with regards to responsibility and social status, to be an editor of a paper that is well known in South Africa. But that didn't come across for me. In actual fact, I thought that Gesant was going to arrive late to the studio, which most VIPs do, and but he was here way before my staff and me, and then I realized, okay, that's the first start. But when I chatted to you, I realized that you're very driven in your space for change, and you want to use the medium for change. And I see this activist side in you, which I never knew was there, coming out through your stories and through you. And I commend that, because generally when people have these positions, they tend to be very flirty about it and
aloof.
Yes, correct, yes. And that's not there at all. How did you get past all of that now that you are the editor? Did it ever cross your mind that, hey, you know what, I can stick my nose a bit up because I've got a good position here? Or do you see that differently?
Look, I think I'm grounded by the fact that, first of all, the values I was taught as a young person with my teachers and my parents and my siblings. But there are times when you need to be a bit cocky as an editor, you know. Otherwise, you're going
That's to get the job done.
You're going to be a pushover, especially when you've got the municipality on your back challenging a legitimate story or that kind of thing. So I'm not a saint, but at the same time, I believe in arriving early for appointments. It shows respect. Punctuality is a sign of professionalism. So and ultimately, if you're late for a story, you miss it. So that's always been driven into me, and it's the kind of values I teach my colleagues as well. And you'll never find me. So we've got this very young newsroom. Newsrooms all over the world are under pressure. We don't have the grey beards we used to have, the guys who've worked for 20 years and are able to write a story just based on their institutional memory. So I have to be a very hands-on editor. You won't find me sitting in my office for longer than half an hour in a day. It's obsolete almost, my office.
That was actually my next question. We wanted to kind of just have a quick preview into what does your day look like? Get up in the morning early. Do you sit there planning what you're going to do? Because I know that, and I can relate to certain aspects, and that's the media changes every day, changes. Yeah. So you can't say at 9 o'clock, I'm going to do that. Something could have happened. So what does your day look like?
So no 2 days are exactly the same for me. I have the best PA in the world, Lentina Ames. I hope she's watching this. She's amazing. And without her, I'd probably leave my head at work every evening. Having said that, I think time management is crucial, and I've had to discipline myself and set myself little targets for the day. So at by 4 o'clock, I need to have a handle on what tomorrow's newspaper is going to look like, and where we want to go with it. You can't decide 5 minutes before deadline, this is the angle I'm going for. You're going to get yourself into all kinds of trouble. But you can only do that effectively with experience. And every day, I'm in the hot seat. I call it being the monkey with a grenade, because you have to make the decisions and the buck stops with you. You have to be able to make decisions quickly, think on your feet, and back yourself. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. But ultimately, I think I've got about 8 years experience as an editor now, and I've seen quite a bit.
Of course.
And I'm able to anticipate what happens next,
Correct. Yes. How do you deal with issues? So not everyone agree with you. We know that in the media space, 50,000 people is going to write to you and say, I love you, I love what you do, I agree with you, and continue doing what you're doing. But on the flip side comes a few people that threaten your life, that say, I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to get you for this. I disagree with you, I'm going to sue you. How do you deal with that?
I think my philosophy has always been to engage. You can ask any of the political parties in our city, in the province, or in the country. I'm never shy to engage, even if we're at loggerheads and we don't agree on something. I believe firmly in my Deba's kind of take on things, that you must be able to speak to somebody and find a common ground, and in there find our common humanity, So for me, it's not so much about the adversary and being afraid of it. I'd like to engage it. And there have been situations earlier in my writing days as a reporter where I've been threatened by gang leaders for exposing them. It was 5 years of avoiding going to a certain area, for example. But at the end of the day, I like to have my work speak for me, rather than me sitting on a soapbox and trumpeting successes and this is what we did, oh look what we've done here. But also always to be true to the readers, because ultimately they're the test, they're the acid test of whether you're doing a good job or not, you know?
Correct, yes. You pioneer very interesting aspects in media, and especially in print media. And for example, your homeless writers at the moment, something I've been following. How do you feel about those things after it's taken off? Do you feel that this is what it's about? You go home at night and you say, I've not only done my job, but I've effected that change. Especially with that story.
It is very satisfying, but you know, it's also good for business. So newspapers are in big trouble. There's no secret about that. So we're being slaughtered out there on breaking news, on social media, on radio. The only breaking news we can do is the ones we invest in. You need to give the reader a different value proposition that they're not going to get anywhere else. So with the homeless project we did, called the Dignity Project, I was invited by a former gang leader. He's a member of the 28th gang. And he became a peace marshal. But instead of working in the area of Kensington where he was allocated, he said, no, I want to work with the homeless people of Cape Town. So I had established this relationship with Magdalene Wenzel. He's the lead character in the book The Number. I don't know if you know it, by Johnny Steinberg. So I've known him for 10 years and he invites me to this group of people at the service dining rooms in town to speak to them about the job I do. I promise you, Faizal, I spent 2 minutes telling them about what I do, and the rest of the time I was just blown away by their stories. So you've got graduates, you've got professionals living on the street.
So you saw the homeless in a different...
I was completely...
different perspective.
Completely blown away. And I went back to the office, and typical cynical reaction by journalists, it's the homeless people, what are we going to do differently, how are we going to tell the story? And I kept at it. And luckily, one of my colleagues, Lance Witten, he was also a TV journalist, he went out one day, he stayed for 2 weeks, we couldn't get him back. And when he started writing these stories, and we found Danny Oosthuizen, one of the homeless people who could write, it turned into this editorial project that just went viral, if I may borrow that term.
Yes.
We were featured on TV, on radio, on blog sites, and we even international sites. For the first time, I think in print history, a homeless man was writing the front page lead for a mainstream newspaper. I remember on one occasion, it was the Mariah Carey concert in the city at the Cape Town Stadium. Somebody called Danny up, a stranger, and said, can you meet me outside? And the woman handed Danny 2 tickets to the Mariah Carey concert. Oh. She was so moved by his column and what he wrote, and I've never seen a response quite like the response to Danny's column. You know, it's written from the heart. He's got this way with words. He represents a constituency in our society that don't have a voice. You know, we drive past homeless people every day. We disregard them. We don't roll down our windows. But worse than that, we don't even ask them, what's your name? How are you doing today? We won't look at them.
So we don't see the humanistic aspect.
We don't. And I think what we try to do is to celebrate the common humanity of homeless people and so-called ordinary citizens of Cape Town. And we're all the same. We have the same dreams, the same aspirations, all looking for a common purpose, you know?
Yes. I know that your wife might be watching the show and saying, I exist too. And yes, of course. So that happens to us in media, you know, that we tend to run around and you probably have lots of social engagements in terms of little speeches and all kinds of things going on, and things in the media happen at any time and anywhere. So you can never say it's 9 to 5, it's not going to happen. How does that affect you? And tell us about the kids and the wife and that sort of thing.
So, you know, marriage is a very tough challenge these days, right? But I think it's directly proportionate in what you put into that marriage. So initially it was very difficult with the hours I keep. I work on a Sunday, and my wife's not a journalist, so she doesn't understand. She never understood, but now, the longer we've been married for 9 years,
she had to adapt to all of that.
She has, and she's been amazing, you know, and she's been a big supporter of my career and, you know, of my work at the paper. She understands what I'm trying to achieve with the paper. being a bridge builder and a builder of social cohesion. My kids are incredible. They keep me going. I've got 3 kids. Ziad, he's 11. My daughter's Kiara, she's 7. And there's another younger daughter, she's 3 years old. And then there's 4 dogs, 2 puppies.
Okay. So you mentioned obviously as part of the family. They are part of the family.
Rabbit.
Yeah.
And I forgot to say my wife's name's Layla. She's just my rock. Very supportive.
So we tend to focus so much on work that we forget about certain aspects in terms of personal life, and yes, that's not very healthy from a mental point of view. But in the end of the day, how do you strike that balance? Because I know it can't be done with time. You can't say it's 5 o'clock, so leave the office. I know you can't do that as an editor. So how do you compensate for all of that?
Honestly, I do that.
That's interesting.
Just after 6 o'clock, I pack things up because it's about your time management, and this is my time that I need to spend with my kids now.
But you have issues happening at 9 o'clock.
We do have issues, but that's why we've got mobile phones.
Right.
We're online. I've got the entire suite system on my laptop. So I've learned to multi-skill and to manage my time properly, but you have to have that balance. I want to be there before my kids go to bed. So I can read them a bedtime story. They need to connect with me. And that's why I'm very jealous about my time. And so I try to achieve what I need to achieve in a few set hours. There are days like election night or the State of the Nation address where I make arrangements. I made an arrangement to be here this morning because I usually do the school run. I do the lunches in the morning. I feed the pets. So we're in a routine. It's important for the kids to have structure, even though I have a crazy job. And luckily, I can function on very little sleep.
Just in conclusion, we look at you and we look at that story and that dynamics and that approach. And without you saying what your approach is to certain aspects are in life, I think that through your temperament, our viewers are able to pick up where you stand on certain issues, because that comes through in the very way that you come across in the things that you do. In the end of the day, there are people watching the show. There are other children and youth in schools that are sitting and kicking that ball around today, and they are the Gesant Abardars of the past. What's your message to them if they want to walk in your shoes?
Look, I think we're very fortunate to live in this democracy we live in. No matter what you read in the headlines, it's never that bad. There's always opportunities to be the best person you can be, whether you want to be a rocket scientist or a football star or a politician or the best advocate in town. And the only limit to your flight, to success, is yourself. You know, and I mean, I grew up in Mitchell's Plain. We had very little resources there, but that didn't stop me. My brother is an amazing graphic designer who's now a filmmaker, and that didn't stop his journey. You know, so you're only limited by your own imagination.
Of course, and I think that's very interesting advice. Throughout your life, you've been surrounded by people that actually become the constructive pillars for what you are today. So whether those things are good or bad, or how you view them, they're actually the basis of who you are today. That's the foundational aspect. But in the end of the day, there are certain people that throughout your life drove you to be who you are, and you stand on that platform today. When you look around you, who's those people that you really want to thank?
Okay, so as I mentioned, my folks, Ahmed and Aloia Abardar, they've been incredible role models to me on so many levels, on a level of professionalism in my work, but also in my marriage, you know, how to conduct yourself, and also as a parent. And then my wife, obviously, Layla, and my kids, they are the cornerstone of what I do, you know, it all comes back to them. And then my siblings, I think, and in particular, I've got a very close relationship with my older brother, and I draw inspiration from him because he's very creative.
And I know it's someone we want to feature soon.
Yes, he's very, very creative, and I draw from his strength, you know, to never back down on a challenge, you know. But I also, I mean, if I look at external role models outside of my close family circle, I read a lot of biographies, right, about leadership, and particularly in the sports space. So when I approach my professional business unit at work, the newsroom, I look at it as a team dynamic. You always have to have the crazy person that can go along for the ride but delivers. But you need to treat each team member different, and it's about person management, like an Alex Ferguson approach to...
Yes, we spoke about that early on before the show started, and what I liked about what you were saying was that you're not taking the old blast from the past approach to dealing with staff and business, but a very progressive team approach to productive output.
I do. So I started off in a first managerial role about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, trying to mimic my mentors who were throwing chairs around and swearing at people. I learned very quickly that that wasn't the way to do things.
You do it sometimes, though.
I do it. I mean, I've got a fierce temper, but I will express it very physically, not with violence, and then it will be over. You know, because I don't like being angry all the time. It doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for my health.
Yes, correct.
But so what I've learned is that everybody's different. You have to have a different approach to each individual. So somebody you can tell off and they'll respond to it. Another person you need to put your arm around them and say, you're doing a great job, you know. And that's learning about your team, because once your team is firing and you have that ecosystem of each one teach one and working together, half of the job's done.
Thank you for coming on the show. I would want to have you back soon when there's some more developments in your life so that we can continue following up with you.
Hopefully they're positive developments.
They've been positive today. Thank you very much. Gesant Abardar with a very inspiring story. What I found pertinent in this discussion was that story of balance. Many of us complain about all the things we need to do, juggle between our jobs, social responsibilities, family time. He's even got a few pets. I've got 3, but he's got a range going on there. And so I admire him for that. So that's a story that must really be looked at. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.